The narrow path. In the heart of Oakhaven, the air is thick with the scent of rain and Sunday dinner. For Detective Tashauna Tay Robinson, her gold badge is only half the story. The other half is written in the margins of the study Bible on her nightstand, and her deep roots at Greater Mount Olive Baptist. When the Widow's Fund is brazenly stolen from the church office, the community's lifeline is severed. For Tashauna, this isn't just a case, it's a violation of holy ground. As she steps into the sanctuary to comfort Sister Claudette and Pastor d'André Reed, she knows the streets of Oakhaven are whispering, and the answers won't come easy. Tashauna must navigate a world of cynical hearts, testing her faith against the cold reality of the precinct. Alongside her partner, Detective Jalen Banks, she's hunting a thief who underestimated one thing, a woman of God who knows that while she serves the law of the land, she ultimately answers to a much higher authority. Prologue: The Lamp and the Light. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the rest of Oakhaven was still caught in the drift of dreams, Tashauna Robinson sat at her kitchen table. A single lamp cast a warm amber circle over the thin, gilded pages of her Bible. Her thumb traced the words of Psalm 119, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." She wasn't just reading, she was arming herself. Being a black woman in the Oakhaven Police Department meant carrying a weight that didn't come with the badge. It was the weight of being a bridge between a community that had been hurt too often and a system that didn't always see them. As she closed the book, the gold leaf edges shimmered. She checked her service weapon, then her reflection. Her braids were pulled back neat and tight, her face a mask of professional calm. "Lord," she whispered into the silence of her apartment, "let me see what others miss and keep my heart soft even when the world is hard." She didn't know then that the phone was about to ring. She didn't know that the sanctity of her childhood sanctuary had been shattered. She just knew that today, the narrow path was going to be uphill. Chapter 1. The sanctuary shivers. The humidity of the Georgia morning clung to Tashauna like a damp sheet the moment she stepped out of her sedan. The flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars danced rhythmically across the red brick face of Greater Mount Olive Baptist Church. It was a sight that made Tashauna's stomach turn. To the world, this was just a crime scene. To her, this was holy ground. "Detective Robinson, over here!" Tashauna adjusted the lapel of her trench coat and walked toward the yellow tape. Jalen Banks was waiting for her, looking uncharacteristically somber. Jalen had been her partner for 3 years. He was a man of few words and a dry wit, but today his face was set in a grim line. "Tell me, it isn't as bad as it sounded on the radio," Tashauna said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "It's worse, Tay," Jalen replied, lifting the tape for her. "They didn't just break in. They knew exactly where to go. The office safe is wide open, cleaned out." Tashauna's heart sank. "The Widow's Fund, that money was supposed to go out to the seniors on Friday for their housing vouchers." "Every dime," Jalen confirmed. "The deacons are inside. Pastor Reed is, well, he's doing what he does. He's praying, but he looks like he's aged 10 years since midnight." Tashauna stepped inside the church. The air usually smelled of lemon polish and Sister Claudette's peppermint candies. Today, it smelled of cold rain and the metallic burnt scent of a forced lock. She walked down the familiar hallway toward the administrative wing. She found Pastor d'André Reed sitting on a folding chair outside his office. He was a tall man with skin the color of deep mahogany and a voice that usually shook the rafters during Sunday service. Now his shoulders were hunched, his large hands resting heavily on his knees. "Pastor," Tashauna said softly, kneeling in front of him. He looked up, and for a moment Tashauna didn't see the powerful leader of the community. She saw a man who felt like he had failed his flock. "Tashauna," he rasped, "I keep asking the Lord, why? Why would someone from our own neighborhood steal from the grandmothers who helped raise them?" "Because greed doesn't have a soul, Pastor," Tashauna said, her voice hardening with the detective's resolve. "But God is still on the throne, and I'm still on the job. We're going to find who did this." She stood up and turned toward the office door. Her eyes began to scan the floor, the doorframe, the dust. Jalen was talking to a patrol officer, but Tashauna tuned them out. She needed to see the evidence of things not seen. There, near the corner of the heavy steel safe, she saw it, a smudge of red clay, common enough in Georgia. But pressed into the clay was a distinct pattern. It wasn't the heavy lug of a work boot or the flat sole of a sneaker. It was a delicate floral thread from a woman's fashion boot. Tashauna pulled her camera from her pocket. The thief wasn't just someone who knew the church. The thief was someone who cared about how they looked while they were breaking the law. "Jalen!" she called out, her voice sharp. "Tell the lab to get down here and get me the sign-in sheet for the choir rehearsal from last night." "We aren't looking for a stranger. We're looking for family." Chapter 2. The Witness in the Rain. The rain had turned from a drizzle to a steady, rhythmic pour that blurred the neon signs of Oakhaven's industrial district. Detective Tashauna Robinson sat in her unmarked sedan, the blue light of her dashboard illuminating the grit under her fingernails. She wasn't thinking about the victim anymore. She was thinking about the cross she'd found in the alley. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a silver-plated encore left by someone who had seen the devil at work and was too scared to scream. "Check the footage again," Tashauna said into her radio. "I'm telling you, Tay," Jalen's voice crackled back. "The kid in the hoodie didn't do the shooting. He was just the lookout. But he saw the shooter's face. He bolted toward the tenements on 8th. Tashauna put the car in gear. The tenements on 8th were a labyrinth of crumbling brick and broken dreams. If the witness went in there, he was either looking for a place to hide or a place to die. She pulled up to the curb, the steam rising from the sewer grates like ghosts. Tashauna stepped out, her hand instinctively resting on the grip of her sidearm. She didn't draw it, not yet. In this neighborhood, showing a gun too early was an invitation for a shootout. She entered the lobby of the first building. The air was thick with the scent of old grease and damp carpet. A group of men stood near the elevators, their eyes tracking her every move with a mix of suspicion and practiced indifference. "I'm looking for a kid," Tashauna said, her voice projecting a calm, unshakable authority. "Blue hoodie, scared. Probably arrived 10 minutes ago." The men didn't move. One of them, angry with the jagged scar running across his knuckles, spat on the floor. "Cops usually come in here looking to break doors, not find kids." Tashauna stepped into his space, close enough to see the dilated pupils of a man who lived on the edge. "I'm not here to break doors. I'm here because a boy saw something that's going to get him deleted if I don't find him first. Now, do you want a body on your doorstep? Or do you want to tell me which floor he ran to?" The man hesitated, caught between the code of the street and the raw truth in Tashauna's eyes. He jerked his chin toward the stairs. "4th floor, end of the hall. But he ain't alone." Tashauna didn't wait for the elevator. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she reached the 4th floor, the hallway was a tunnel of peeling wallpaper and flickering lights. At the far end, a door hung slightly off its hinges. She drew her weapon, her movements silent and fluid. As she approached the door, she heard a muffled sob. "Police! Tashauna Robinson!" she called out, her voice firm but devoid of malice. "I'm coming in. Keep your hands where I can see them." She kicked the door open. The room was small, lit only by the gray light from a cracked window. A teenager, the boy in the blue hoodie, was huddled in the corner, clutching a rusted pipe. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the man standing over him, a man whose shadow swallowed the boy whole. "Step away from him," Tashauna commanded, her sight centered on the stranger's chest. The man turned slowly. He was dressed in a tailored coat that didn't belong in a tenement, and his face was as cold as the rain outside. He didn't look like a street thug. He looked like a businessman who specialized in permanent solutions. "You're late, detective," the man said, his voice a smooth, terrifying silk. "The boy has seen too much, and in my world there are no witnesses." Tashauna didn't flinch. Her finger tightened on the trigger, her faith providing the steady hand the law required. "In my world, there's justice, and you're standing right in its path." Chapter 3: The Shadow Under the Steeple. The steeple of Greater Mount Olive cast a long, jagged shadow over the neighborhood as the sun began to dip behind the Georgia pines. For Tashauna, that shadow wasn't a comfort today. It was a reminder that someone had looked at a place of peace and saw a target. She stood in the center of the administrative wing, the yellow police tape fluttering in the draft from the broken window. She wasn't looking at the safe anymore. She was looking at the path. "Jalen, get over here!" Tashauna called out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Jalen Banks stepped into the room, snapping his latex gloves on. "Forensics is still 10 minutes out, Tay. What'd you find?" Tashauna pointed to the floor near the back exit. "Everyone's focused on the safe, but look at the doorframe. There are no pry marks on the outside. The scratches are on the inside. The lock was bypassed from the hallway, not the alley." "So the thief was already in the building before the alarm was set?" Jalen asked, leaning down to get a better look. "Exactly. They hid inside during the evening service, waited for the building to clear, and then went to work," Tashauna said. She walked toward the back door, her eyes fixed on the ground. "And they didn't leave through the front where the cameras are. They used the service entrance, the ones that lead straight into the construction zone." She stepped outside into the mud. The red clay was thick here, churned up by the heavy machinery used for the church's new wing. Tashauna pulled a high-powered flashlight from her belt and swept the beam across the ground. There, pressed into the cooling muck, was the print she'd been looking for. It wasn't a heavy work boot or a flat sneaker. It was delicate, a series of swirling floral patterns etched into the rubber sole of a high-end fashion boot. "A woman," Jalen muttered, standing behind her. "A woman who knows the layout, knows the safe is kept heavy on Sunday nights, and knows exactly which camera has a blind spot," Tashauna added. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't a random act of desperation. This was a calculated strike against the heart of the community. Tashauna pulled her phone and snapped a clear photo of the tread. She didn't see just a print. She saw a signature. In Oakhaven, there were only 2 boutiques that sold specific brands of destiger for swear. I don't care how many doors we have to kick or how many witnesses we have to squeeze, Tashauna said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. Whoever wore these boots walked into a house of God to steal from people who have nothing. I'm going to find her, and I'm going to find whoever she's working for. Where do we start? Jalen asked. Tashauna looked back up at the steeple, her face set in stone. We start at the source. If she's got the money, she's looking to move it. And in this town, all dirty money flows to the same place, the East Side docks. She turned and headed for her car, her stride long and purposeful. The investigation was no longer just about a break-in. It was a war. Chapter 4, The Midnight Altar. The East Side docks didn't have the grace of Oakhaven's historic district. Here the air was thick with the smell of diesel, dead fish, and the low-tide rot of the river. Tashauna killed the lights on her sedan 2 blocks away, letting the car coast into the shadow of a rusted shipping container. Jalen, I'm in position, she whispered into her comms. Warehouse 14, I see a black SUV parked by the loading dock. No plates? Copy that, Tay. I'm coming around the south side. Don't go in without me. Jalen's voice crackled. Tashauna didn't answer. She couldn't. She had already spotted something that made her blood run cold. Stepping out of the SUV was a woman dressed in a dark trench coat. But as she climbed the metal stairs of the warehouse, the floodlight caught the side of her footwear. The floral tread of her designer boots left a distinct muddy print on the steel step. Found you, Tashauna thought. She moved with the silence of a predator, staying low behind the stacks of industrial crates. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was tense. The woman with the boots was standing in front of a makeshift table, a wooden crate that served as a midnight altar for their transaction. Resting on it was the black duffel bag from the church office. Opposite her stood a man Tashauna didn't recognize, but his posture screamed professional muscle. He wasn't from Oakhaven. He was outside work, just like she'd suspected. Is it all here? The man asked, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. Every cent of the widow's fund, the woman replied, her voice trembling slightly. Now give me the keys. My brother's debt is paid. We're done. The debt is never really paid, Sieda, the man said, a cruel smile pulling at his lips. It just changes hands. Tashauna saw the man reach into his jacket. He wasn't reaching for keys. She didn't wait for Jalen. She didn't wait for a backup that was 3 minutes too slow. She stepped from the shadows, her service weapon raised and locked on the man's center mass. Police! Drop the weapon! Hands where I can see them! Tashauna's voice exploded through the warehouse, a thunderclap of authority that shattered the man's focus. The man froze, his hands still inside his coat. Sida gasped, stumbling back against the crate. Detective Robinson? Sida's voice was a frantic whisper. You don't understand. They were going to delete him. I understand plenty, Sida, Tashauna said, her eyes never leaving the gunman. I understand you brought a wolf to our doorstep. Now, sir, I'm going to count to 3. If that hand comes out with anything other than empty fingers, the Lord is going to have to settle your accounts, because I'm finishing mine right here. The warehouse was silent except for the rain drumming on the roof. Tashauna stood her ground, her feet planted, her faith and her training merging into a single, unbreakable line of defense. 1, she started. The man looked at her, seeing the badge and the iron-willed woman behind it. He realized he wasn't staring down a victim. He was staring down the law in Oakhaven. Chapter 5, The Gathering Storm. The metal stairs of the warehouse groaned as Jalen burst through the south entrance, his weapon drawn and his tactical light cutting through the thick, salty air. Don't even think about it, Jalen barked at the gunman. The man from the SUV slowly pulled his hand out of his coat, palms empty. He knew when the odds had shifted. Behind him, Sida Vance was trembling so hard, the floral-printed boots she wore scuffed loudly against the concrete. She looked at Tashauna, her eyes wide with a mixture of shame and terror. Cuff him, Jalen, Tashauna commanded, her voice like iron. She didn't lower her weapon until the metallic click of the restraints echoed through the hollow space. Tashauna walked toward the altar, the wooden crate holding the church's stolen lifeblood. She picked up the duffel bag, the weight of it heavy in her hand. She turned to Sida, who had collapsed onto a stack of pallets, her head in her hands. Sida, look at me, Tashauna said. It wasn't a request. Sida looked up, tears streaking her face. They were going to delete Terrell, detective. He got in deep with the wrong people at the docks. I didn't know what else to do. I have the keys to the administrative wing. I thought if I just borrowed it, I could... You didn't borrow anything, Sida. You stole from the very people who have been praying for your brother since he was in diapers. Tashauna cut her off, her voice dropping to a low, painful whisper. You brought the world's rot into the sanctuary. I was scared, Sida sobbed. Being scared doesn't give you the right to be a thief, Tashauna replied. She looked at the man Jalen was leading away, a professional collector who didn't care about Oakhaven or its people. He was the real predator, but Sida had opened the door for him. Tashauna's phone buzzed. It was a text from the precinct, a preliminary scan on the SUV's VIN. The vehicle was linked to a series of church robberies across the state line. This wasn't just a local debt. Sida had been scouted. Jalen, get her to the car, Tashauna said, zip-tying the duffel bag shut. And call Pastor Reed. Tell him the fund is recovered, but tell him the truth. Tell him it was one of our own. As Tashauna walked out of the warehouse, the storm finally began to break. The clouds were parting, but the air felt heavier than before. She had the money and she had the suspects, but the victory tasted like ash. Being a good detective meant finding the truth, but being a woman of faith meant living with how much that truth could hurt. She stood by her car, clutching the bag to her chest, looking out at the dark waters of the river. The crime was solved, but the healing was going to require a lot more than a badge. Chapter 6. The Lion's Den. The interrogation room at the Oakhaven precinct was a small claustrophobic box that smelled of stale coffee and industrial-grade cleaner. Tashauna sat across from the man she hauled off the docks. In the harsh fluorescent light, he looked even more out of place. His suit was expensive, his skin smooth, and his eyes held the bored indifference of someone who had been through the system more times than he could count. His name, according to his Maryland ID, was Victor Thorne, but the fingerprints Jalen had run told a different story. You're a long way from home, Victor, Tashauna said, leaning back and tossing a thin file folder onto the metal table. Or should I call you the Bishop? That's the name popping up in the federal database in connection to those church hits in Virginia and the Carolinas. Thorne didn't blink. He sat with his hands cuffed to the bar on the table, a smug half-smile playing on his lips. I'm just a businessman, detective. I collect debts. What people do to pay those debts isn't my concern. It becomes my concern when those business transactions involve a tactical break-in at a place of worship, Tashauna countered. She leaned forward, her presence filling the narrow space between them. You didn't just stumble onto Sida Vance. You scouted her. You found a girl with a brother in trouble and a key to the safe, and you squeezed her until she broke. Thorne chuckled, a dry, metallic sound. You've got a vivid imagination. I was just meeting a lady for a late-night stroll. Tashauna slammed her hand onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The smile vanished from Thorne's face. Don't play with me, she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. I've spent 12 hours in the rain. I've got a church full of heartbroken grandmothers, and I've got enough evidence to tie that SUV to 3 separate crime scenes across state lines. You're looking at RICO charges, Victor. You're looking at 20 to life. She paused, watching the shadow of a doubt flicker in his eyes. But I know how this works, Tashauna continued, her tone shifting to a chillingly calm professional lure. A man like you doesn't run a multi-state ring alone. You're the muscle. You're the one who gets his shoes muddy, who's giving the orders, who's providing the intel on which churches have the biggest funds and the weakest security. Thorne shifted in his chair, the metal rattling. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone is feeding you the schedules, Victor. Someone who knows the internal audits. You aren't just hitting random buildings, you're hitting sanctuaries, Tashauna said. She leaned in even closer, her eyes boring into his. My faith tells me that everyone can be redeemed, but my badge tells me that you're a predator. Give me the name of the man at the top, and maybe I can talk to the DA about cooperation. If not, you're the one who's going to carry the cross for this whole crew. Thorne stayed silent for a long minute. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice a bare whisper. You think you're so righteous, detective, but the man running this? He doesn't live in the gutters. He's the kind of man who shakes hands with mayors and sits in the VIP sections. He calls himself the architect. And if he finds out I'm talking to a local cop in a town like Oakhaven, he'll have me erased before I hit the yard. Tashauna straightened up. The architect. It was a lead, but it was a heavy one. I'll take my chances with the architect, she said, standing up and signaling to Jalen through the one-way glass. But for now, you're staying in my house. And in Oakhaven, we don't let predators go free. As she walked out of the room, her heart was racing. The case wasn't just about a stolen fund anymore. It was about a shadow moving through the south, and Tashauna Robinson was the only one standing in its light. Chapter 7. The Architect's Reckoning. The trail of the architect didn't lead to a back alley. It led to a glass-walled office overlooking the Savannah River. Using the intel squeezed from Thorne, Tashauna and Jalen had tracked the encrypted communications to a private security firm, one that specialized in consulting for religious organizations. The man behind the desk was Julian Vane. He was polished, wearing a suit that cost more than Tashauna made in 6 months. He wasn't a street thug. He was a vulture in a tie. using his knowledge of church security systems to facilitate the very robberies he was supposed to prevent. Detective Robinson, Vane said, not looking up from his tablet as Tashauna and Jalen entered. I assumed Thorne would have more backbone. I suppose I overpaid for his loyalty. Loyalty is a foreign concept to people like you, Vane, Tashauna said, her hand resting firmly on her belt. You didn't just rob buildings. You sold out the safety of people who trusted you. Vane stood up, walking to the window. I provided a service. I showed those congregations their weaknesses. If they can't protect their own tithes, they aren't fit to lead. It's basic economics. It's basic theft, Jalen barked, stepping forward with the cuffs ready. You have a digital footprint that leads straight to the East Side docks, Vane, Tashauna said, her voice dropping to a calm, deadly level. We found the blueprints for Mount Olive on your private server. We found the wire transfers. The architect's bridge just collapsed. Vane turned, a flash of desperation crossing his face. He moved toward the drawer of his desk, but Tashauna was a blur of motion. She didn't draw her weapon. She used her training. She lunged across the desk, her hand catching Vane's wrist in a tactical lock before his fingers could touch the cold steel of the hidden pistol. With a swift, practiced motion, she spun him around, pressing his face against the expensive mahogany desk. In my world, Tashauna whispered in his ear, the humble are exalted and the proud are brought low. You're done, Julianne. As Jalen secured the restraints, the weight that had been sitting on Tashauna's chest since the night of the break-in finally lifted. 2 days later, the sun was shining brightly over Oakhaven. Tashauna stood on the steps of Greater Mount Olive, watching as the seniors arrived for their Tuesday luncheon. The Widows' Fund had been fully restored, and the security flaws Vane had exploited were being patched by a firm with actual integrity. Cedar Vance was there too, working in the kitchen. She was facing community service and a long road to earn back the town's trust, but she was still there. That was the thing about this community. It was built on a foundation of second chances. Jalen pulled his car up to the curb, leaning out the window. Hey, Tay, we just got a lead on that cold case in the North District. You ready to get back to work? Tashauna looked at the church one last time, then back at her partner. She adjusted her badge, the silver glinting in the light. I've been ready, Jalen, she said, a small, determined smile touching her lips. The shadows don't take a day off, and neither do I. She walked down the steps, her stride confident and her heart at peace. The city was still tough, and the streets were still mean. But as long as Tashauna Robinson was on the beat, the light would always have a fighter in its corner. The end.